How's it going, YouTube? Coming at you today with another video, and today, guys, what we're going to do is going to be the Ycs 250th recap, and I do hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over at Imperial Duelist, Dragon Shield, or Gem, definitely go ahead and do so, all down in the description below. And without further ado, let's hop right on into our first topic. The first thing I want to talk about today is going to be Runic Naturia. This deck is really crazy. Sunflower and Beast, some of the craziest negates that you get in the deck. Sunflower, not once per turn, neither is Beast. And then also with the amount of Runic going around the format right now, being able to just pass on a Beast is also really nice, alongside your Baron that you probably have with Runic as a backup. Now, Runic though, before in my last video, I did say that Runic probably wouldn't get a hit. After looking at how the decks were performing this weekend, I could definitely see Runic getting a hit. It's very similar to like Striker Orchest, where the deck really got a buff from the Striker engine and a lot of the draw power. It's very similar to what the Runic engine is doing, but now you're getting a lot more draws than just Engage. So I definitely could see Hugin go into 1, maybe they hit Fountain, maybe they just put all the good spells to 2 or to 1. But we'll have to see what happens. I do think that Runic probably ends up getting hit now, but this deck has been really good. Definitely a huge call for the weekend. One of the decks that when you were going into the weekend, you probably knew that you're going to have to play against quite a few times, and this was definitely popular. But moving forward after the ban list, I don't think that this deck is going to be going anywhere. I do think, though, that we'll see some consistency hits for sure. The next thing is Kashira. Now, this deck, I believe, in the top 64 had like 33, which is kind of insane. Kashira is one of those decks, too, that you just really have to respect, right? And even under a skill drain, the monsters are still gigantic. And that's another thing that I saw really help this deck win a few times. And that's just because even in a very simplified game state, just having the bigger monster on the board, it just goes back to old school Yu-Gi-Oh! You know, a high attack is a high attack. And that's pretty cool too. But beside that, of course, having the zone lockout, having the force summon a Rise Heart, and then also having Lance, and just a huge amount of different combinations for the deck, let alone having Diabolos. That card has to go. Enabling you to go ahead and just lock a whole bunch of zones to go to the Shangri era. And then you also get to look at your opponent's extra deck and take out a huge part of their strategy. That's something too that kind of ruins deck building for the extra deck, and that's something that I really want to see changed, because having to run 2 ofs is kind of crazy. But moving forward, I'm sure that we'll probably end up seeing a Diabolos hit. Kashira did overperform this weekend, as always, though. The deck itself is very consistent. We did see the Runic engine in this, and we did see a couple lists, too, that were playing Desires and Prosperity, because you really want to be able to draw out of bad situations in this deck. That's what a lot of builds are doing now, though. They're playing double pot cards. But moving into Dragon Link, this is something that I actually really wanted to talk about. I think this deck is really solid this format, and the next format, Dragon Link is going to be one of the better decks. This would be a safe pick going into next format, I think, but it's also really nice too because we're getting the level 2, we're getting the new Bistral Synchro, and then I also want to talk about a huge ruling from the stream. Shoutouts to Aaron McGinnis for doing this on stream too. Levianeer's effect is pretty crazy, especially when you're playing against a lot of Runic. So what happened was there was a Fountain on board and a Hugin on board, and then Levianeer activated its effect. So then you can go ahead and blow up the Hugin and the Fountain, and since the Hugin's already marked for destruction, they can't go ahead and use Hugin to protect the Fountain. So Levianeer, definitely a really crazy card across many formats, and it won't be any different moving forward. But Dragon Link in general is very strong. Of course, getting your Striker Dragon ripped is really unfortunate, but if Diabolos actually gets banned, it's only going to make this deck better. So definitely go ahead and pick up a Dragon Core. I think that's going to be a really fun one next format. That's probably what I'll end up playing too. But talking about Mech as well, the most consistent deck of the weekend, I feel, because you can have Circular, but you can have a number of hands, and there's so many different ways you can play the deck too. Typically, we're seeing a lot of the Adventure engine. Mech alone did perform pretty well this weekend. It may not have won any of the YCSs, but it definitely performed well. This is a deck that plays a lot of hand traps, including things like Droll, and if you're not already on Droll, play Droll. It's a really crazy card, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But there's so many different hand traps that you can play in this deck. So yes, you can go first and set up a pretty crazy board with Decode Talker and what have you. But you also can go second and get a very quick OTK with the Update Jammer access code play. So Mech alone, Definitely going to be a contender moving forward, and definitely showed up this weekend. The next thing I want to talk about is going to be Sprite. Now, Sprite did win YCS London, and this deck is really nice too. I feel like when all the decks are pretty much doing the same thing, this is one of the best decks that you can play, especially since this is one of the most consistent. And just being able to recycle your engine every turn, using Double Cross for an extra Toad or Testudo, being able to just summon any two from the deck, being able to send Angler, summon more bodies to the board, having cards like Mosquito to go ahead and go for the OTK. There's so many reasons to play Sprite, and there's so many variants. The one that won London was Melfi. You also can play Adventure, you can play Live Twin. There's just a lot of ways to play this deck, and that's something that I really like, is versatility, because in a format, you never really know what's going to take the top spot, and you never really know what's going to change after a ban list, but there's always ways to adapt, and a deck like this will adapt for sure. And that's something that I do expect to see in Dragon, is probably teching in a copy of potentially Gigantic Sprite, just to go ahead and summon that level 2 from the deck, but we'll see what happens with that too. Definitely going to be really cool. Maybe we see Sprint to go ahead and just send it to the graveyard, but Sprite moving forward, I think probably will end up getting a small hit, but I don't think it's going to be anything like too crazy, right? Like even if they limit Jet, I don't think that's going to matter all too much. But looking forward into the popular hand traps for the format so far, and especially these events this weekend, Droll is one of by far the craziest cards. If this card's a god card in the format, it's a god card in that format. Because most of the times, if you drop Droll, it's just turn ending, which means it's game ending, because you're probably OTKing that next turn. And that's a lot of what this format turned into. Is like, did you make it past turn 3? Probably not. And that's where the games usually end. Droll is just in general one of the craziest cards. Most people are maining 2 and siding 1, so I definitely recommend going ahead and just maining Droll. This card's really broke in this format. The next one is Nibiru. Now I want to talk about this one for a moment, because a lot of people really don't like this right now, and I feel like that's when Nibiru is the best, right? Because if you're not expecting anyone to be on this card because everyone says it sucks, then that's when it's going to be really crazy when you drop it on someone, right? So kind of keep that in mind too. Nibiru is really mid when everyone knows it's good, but when no one really likes it or everyone thinks it's bad, it's when it's insane. And that's usually been pretty true, because Nibiru kind of cycles in and out of metas. And for the metas where it's like actually bad, then that's fine. But there's a lot of times where like a combo comes out, or if you even look at like Gigantic, right? Everyone said that Nibiru would be irrelevant and just like gone from the format forever. But we all realized that, first of all, Sprite was not the only deck he played against. And there's a lot of times where people will go sprint, dump Angler first, and then get punished by Nibiru. So definitely a couple things that you want to keep in mind. But I always think that Nibiru is the best in the formats where no one expects it. So maybe if everyone's saying it's bad, it's good. You never really know. The last one here, Kurakara. This card's really interesting. I don't think that it deserved a $40 buyout, but it is really good at what it does. Not once per turn. The final round of YCS London and seeing 2 of these hit the board, then Tactics and Starter, that was the craziest final. That was so nice. But Kurakara, definitely a pretty crazy card. Kurakara comes out at least 3,000, which is pretty wild whenever you're going for lethal. That's a lot of attack. So I could definitely see this being relevant down the road, especially if there's a lot of cards that you just really need to be able to clear from the board, and maybe they have a lot of protection. But this is definitely one of the most unique hand traps that we have, and I think moving forward we could still see it being relevant in future formats. The last thing I want to talk about today is going to be potential banless hits, and I already talked about this in my last video, but I kind of wanted to review a little bit. Again, Hugin, maybe they go after some of the spells or Fountain, but I think that Hugin's definitely the answer here to put this to 1, so if you negate it 1 time, they can't just go ahead and start cycling, but they can still go ahead and try to get the Fountain in other ways. I think that they'll go ahead and end up limiting Unicorn or Fenrir. Both of these cards are really strong. Unicorn's definitely full combo, but Fenrir does get you pretty far. And then lastly, D-Barrier and Erad. They didn't really show up this weekend, but definitely cards that still gotta go no matter what. These cards are really broken, and they're just gonna end up coming back regardless. So definitely go ahead and just ban the win buttons. But I do hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you haven't already joined my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and if you want a coaching session over on my Metafy, definitely PM me on Discord if you have any questions. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so we can hit 20,000 by the end of the year, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful night. Thank you.